With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sanhedrin Daf Samach Hey. We are mamash on top of the Amid. We are starting with the Mishnah. As we mentioned yesterday and prior to that, on Daf Nun Gimel, you can go back to Daf Nun Gimel, the Mishnah begins to enumerate all of these sins for which one is chayiv, skila, elohein, haneskolin. So we left off yesterday by that was yesterday's shir. So now the Mishnah Daf Nun Gimel continues. Ubal oif v'yadoini v'machal Shabbos, etc. So we're going to focus today. The whole daf will be on bal oif v'yadoini. Bal meaning a practitioner of a certain sorcery, kishuf, not avodah zarah, known as oif. We're going to learn about the practitioner of Yadoini. These were two mediums through which people attempted to get in touch with the dead for the primary purpose of knowing the future. It's a chiyuv, it's not avodah zarah. The Torah nevertheless writes that chayiv skila, lahoyer dat Rambam in Perush HaMishnayos and in other places speaking about sorcery / kishuv / black magic writes that black magic is something she'ein ba mamish. The big challenge, that means it's really nothing. It's almost like a sleight of the eye or an illusion. And there are so many chazals that seem to imply that there is an actual power in it. And many will use the concept that we shared yesterday, how the Yetzer Hara of Avodah Zarah came out of the Kodesh Kachim. And there is a concept called Zelu Umazel Pi Chasidus, and that's the way it works. And many people say that in earlier generations, when the Tzad HaKedusha was more accessible to us, at that time, Zelu Umazeh, the koyach of Tumah, of the dark arts, were also greater. But as, sadly, temporarily, we lost a certain level of connection to deeper levels of Kedusha, Golus, Zelu Umazeh, so that's why already, Bisman HaRambam, the type of koyach that it used to have, it no longer had. Anyways, that is how some explain Shitas HaRambam. What we're going to learn today is going to be, I think, the greatest. Not only are we going to be discussing again about lav sheyesh by Maisa, lav she'ein by Maisa, then we're going to differentiate between Maisa Rabba and Maisa Zuta, Akimas Fosayim Haba Maisa, Ishtachava Maisa, which will link it to the sugya that we learned up until now, but something is very foundational for people to have. What most people are familiar with is the rule, according to some, that lav she'ein by Maisa, you don't get malchus, which is what we discussed. Today we're going to go something similar, but it's not the same. And that is, what about a chatos? So when it comes to a chiyuv chatos, that's going to be the beginning of Masechtas Kerisos. The rule is any sin for which b'mezid chayiv kodes, you're shoygig chayiv chatos. What about a sin for which b'mezid you're not chayiv kodes, but you're chayiv skila, or you're chayiv misan bezdin? So actually, there's a havamina that should also bring about a chiyuv chatos. It doesn't. But I want to speak about the concept of lav sheyesh by Maisa or ein by Maisa, how that will affect the chiyuv chatos. There's a concept that if it's a lav she'ein by Maisa, even when b'zdoinei kodes, since there is no Maisa, you're not going to be chayiv a chatos. We're going to learn some very interesting big questions, like how do we know that Shabbos is Shabbos? One of the questions that Turnus Rufus, whose debate with Rabbi Akiva is recorded various places in Shas, he began to ask questions and then he clarified, it's maybe, there's Shabbos Kodesh, but if mankind at some point way early on got confused with the days and then everyone is just doing what their parents did, what the community does, how do you know that what we count as Shabbos, maybe it's not Shabbos? That was the question that he asked, and Rabbi Akiva gave him 3 simanim from this world, how you know Shabbos, and that's where you have the record of Sambatiyon, which is actually expounded a lot more in the Midrashim about the 10 Shvatim, that he went in a place through which you can only get there through a river, through a big river, and the river is inaccessible. You cannot go through it during the 6 days of the week because it's like constantly chewing up stones and rocks, and those rivers come down on Shabbos. The only way to get there is on Shabbos. That's the Sambatiyoim. We're going to learn about creating with Sefer Yetzirah. We're going to learn about whether it was Rava, whether it was Rabba, how he created a man, a person who lacked the koyach of speech. Gemara, when people ask, is the goylam of a real or not real. The Gemara speaks about the Rava or Rabba creating a Goylam. We're going to speak about other Amoraim that would create for Shabbos Kodesh every week. They would create an animal. That was their parnasa. If we'll have time, we'll also continue to learn about Ma'oinen. Ma'oinen means people who say that this should only be done at that time. That should be done at another time, which is prohibited with a lav. And there's so much to speak about that topic. We do know that especially people that follow more, they behave al pi Kabbalah. We don't say Tehillim until midnight unless there's an extraordinary reason. That's the general rule. And we dafka stay Tehillim after midnight. And so there are certain types of, I don't do this at that time. I do other things in other times that is not only acceptable, but it's gavaldik. There is a certain limit to that. There are times that being machaven by saying, I'm not going to do that Monday. I'm only going to do it Tuesday, something that one may not do. And that's going to link it into the next topic of nichush, superstition. Nichush is asur. And wow, a loaded daf. Let's start Chevra daf Samachei Amud Aleph all the way on the top of the Amid Baruch Atah Adinoi Eloheinu Malachim Shakol Nimedor. Okay, says the Mishnah, Baal Oiv. When the Torah prohibits that one may not practice the sorcery known as Oiv, Ze Pitoim. Chevra Pitoim means a wizard. All right, a machashev. If you have a magician, we'll speak about today's magicians and the whole topic, whether making an illusion is asur midai raiso. What does that mean? That's pisaim. What does pisam do? Hamadaber mishachyoi. Zokt Rashi. What they do is they manage to bring on their body a spirit of the dead, and they bring it on under their armpit. And as we'll see in the Gemara details, when the spirit goes under their armpit, they have to clap their arms on their bodies, and that causes that spirit to speak the future. V'yudoini is something similar. Zehamadaber b'fiv, as the Gemara is going to clarify, that they take a bone from an animal that is called in the holy tongue Yodua. That's the name of the animal, and they put that bone in their mouth. And that brings up again the spirit of the dead. And then the spirit speaks from their mouth, primarily responding to what will happen in the future. Just to make something very interesting point, as we'll see in the Gemara, that when the bone would speak from the mouth, the person, the wizard, would not move his lips. That would be very foundational to understanding the whole flow of the Gemara. It was putting it in the mouth as an action, but that's a preliminary action. The actual practice happened at a time where the medium did nothing. Says the Mishnah, these two practices is exactly what the Torah is referring to, that whoever practices it is chayiv skila, and the hanishal bohem, people who go to them, who inquire from them, they're not going to be chayiv skila, but they're violating a lav that's called bi'ahazon. Says Rashi, what is the lav? So Rashi quotes from Parshas Kedoshim, where it says, Al tifnu ela avos, right? The el hayadoinim. Al tifnu means don't turn to them. And when you learn Chumash Rashi, when you teach the pshat, it sounds just like it. This is a very big daf, but just to be aware that Tosfos has a bomb question on Rashi, which is, just like Avodah Zarah, these psukim are repeated in Kedoshim, they're repeated in Shoftim. If Al tifnu el elilim were to mean you don't inquire from them, in Parsha Shoftim, the Torah says that whoever does that is chayiv skila. And the fact that the Mishnah is making the point that the practitioner is chayiv skila, the inquirer is violating a lav. That's the Tosfos on the top. Cannot be lo yimatze b'cha, right? You should be chayiv kares. As it says, it says in Parshas Kedoshim, "B'ha nefesh asher tifna v'hichrati oisa." And therefore, Tosfos has a whole different source, and he doesn't teach al tifnu. He teaches al tifnu goes to the practitioner. So, wow, that's one big topic. We learn chitas pasha to know how to teach, to know how to teach that one liner machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Okay, but no one debates the fact. You practice it, chayiv skila. You inquire from them, you're alive. Now, contrast. My friends, the Masechta Kerisos begins with the Mishnah enumerating the 36 violations for which b'mezet kares, b'shoigeg chatos. The Mishnah over there also speaks about oiv and yodoini. Oiv and yodoini. Problem is, fragt die Gemara, over here in Masechta Sanhedrin, the Ktani bal oiv v'yodoini, the Mishnah mentions both. Krisus, in the beginning of Masechtas Krisus, the Ktani bal oiv, the Mishnah mentions bal oiv, but v'shayrei, the Mishnah omits, right? The Mishnah leaves out liyodoini. Why? Two answers, and let's go back and forth. Rabbi Yechanan answers, I'll tell you why. Hoyl v'shneim belav echad nemru. We're learning Rashi. Rashi says, Al tifnu el ha'avois ve'el hayedoinim. Don't. Okay, he's quoting the same pasuk that he mentioned before. Not al tifnu el ha'avois ve'al tifnu el hayedoinim. Al tifnu to both together. And therefore, this is the rule, my friends, that what happens if someone did both the shoygig? So the rule is the mezid kares, the shoygig chatos. What happens if a person violated both under the same lapse of unawareness? We learned this just a few daf ago. The helamachas. How many chatois are you chayiv? Well, if they are both included in the same lav, you're going to be chayiv one chatos. I know that Shabbos is the exception. That's because havara, right? We learned either havara is lachalik yatsa, or we had that ma'achas mehena. But normally, when God says don't do something, and you did two violations in that general don't, you're chayiv one chatos. So that's the word of Rabbi Yechanan. Since they're written in one lav, if a person b'shoigig both practice oiv and practice yudoini, they're going to be chayiv only one chatos. The goal of krisus is really to focus not only on the kadas, but also that if you did a b'shoigig, chayiv chatos, it's one chatos. He only mentions one of the two.
Meaning that if you only did one out of
you chayiv chatos. If you did both, you also only chayiv one chatos. Over here, what are we learning about kai skila? There's no such a thing as skila b'shoigig. The topic in Sanhedrin is skila. Skila is b'mezid. B'mezid for this your skila and for that your skila. We have great answer. Now Shlakish says, no, you're wrong at Rabbi Yechanan. In other words, you're right, but sometimes because of your right plus, the plus makes you wrong. How are you wrong? You doini lefisha ein by maisa. Whoa, 1 second. You're telling me, Rabbi Yechanan, if you did them both together, you chayv one chatas. But you are simply you are saying that if you only practice oiv b'shoigeg or only yudoini, then you're going to be chayv chatas. At least no, nishtemes. How are you chayv chatas? See, that's the sugi of chatas. That chatas you only chayv when you do an action. And as we'll speak out, oiv, missed the intro, is they used to bang their arms on their body. They would bang with their arms. That's called a maisa. The yodoini, even though putting the bone in the mouth is an action, but that was a preliminary. While this magic was happening, while this dark magic was happening, the wizard did not move his lips. The bone would speak. The sound, a voice would come out from the mouth while the medium was mamish channeling it. There's no maisa there. This is b'chal no chatos. Now, Rabbi Yechanan, before we go back to this problem, even according to Rabbi Yechanan, if you did both together, my friends, you chayiv one chatos, but why are you giving the example of oiv? Give the example of yudoini. Maishna about oiv the knockout answers the Gemara, because when the Torah speaks about oiv and yudoini, the Torah always puts oiv before yudoini. Bishum the pasach beikra. Now, Shlokish my tamal amik Rabbi Yechanan. Right, regarding the Mishnah in Krisus, Amar Rav Papa says Rav Papa, even if Rabbi Yechanan would have been right, it means even if you would be chayiv only one chatas for one, Reish Lakish holds it's right, but it's wrong. He holds only one is machayiv you a chatas. But even if that would be the case, that's not a reason to make any omissions in krisus. You know why? Because chaluk and hein b'misa. In other words, since each one carries its own death penalty, even though the Torah writes al tifnu el ha'avos ve'el hayedoinim, the only includes it in one lav. Since the Torah is machayev misa for each one, Reish Lakish holds you would be chayev two chatois. If not for the fact that yudoini is lav she'ein by ma'isa, you would be chayev two chatois. It's a big thing. This, in other words, what's mechalik for a chatos? Normally we say when the Torah says don't do it. No, here the Torah wrote don't do it once for two activities. But since when the Torah mentions this concerning skila, each one is mechayev skila, chiyuv skila is mechalik lechatois. The Rabbi Yechanan holds that the chalukah, the lav is called a chalukah. if the Torah would have written Al Tifnu El Avos and Ve Al Tifnu El Hayedonim. But a Chaluka de Misa Lo Yishma Chaluka. Wow. Okay. Now, weiter. Rabbi Yochanan, my time alone, Resh Lakish is right. Resh Lakish is arguing that if you practice Yedoini B'Shoigeg, you should not be Chayv Chatos because it's a lav she'ein boy ma'isa. So Amalach, to which Rabbi Yochanan will respond, who told you that if it's a lav she'ein boy ma'isa, you are exempt of? Who told you that? So lav she'ein boy ma'isa. Just to know the source we have in Marcus. The source is that in Parshas Ki Seitzei, when the Torah writes the one time explicitly Aboim Yakenu, right after the Malchus, whenever the Torah speaks about the 40 lashes, which means 40 minus 1, the next pasuk is that when you're threshing with an ox, don't muzzle, don't put a muzzle on the mouth of the animal. And Chazal Darshan from the Smichos, when a Yechayiv Malchus, if when you did something, you did it through an action. Not everyone subscribes to that. Who argues with that? Rabbi Akiva. Where does Rabbi Akiva argue in Krisis concerning Megadef? From the Mishnah counts from the 36, Megadef is to say, now I know that speaking, we'll see these words, is called a Maisa Zuta, or a Kimas, or to speak, you're moving your lips. But let's go with the premise that it's not called an action. You're just talking. Dibur, it's not Maisa. Rabbi Akiva still holds that from a Gadef, you're Chayiv B'Shroigeg. So therefore, says Rabbi Yochanan, Masnis and the Krisus follows Rabbi Akiva. Which is why the Mishnah in Krisus includes in the 36 Megadef. The Gemara in Krisus says it's not the Chachamim because the Chachamim would omit Megadef. Rabbi Akiva, you're Chayiv anyways for Lav She'ein B'I Mais. So Rabbi Yochanan holds that according to Rabbi Akiva, if a person practices Yudoini B'Shroigig, they're going to be Chayiv Chatos. Elomad is one thing that if a person practices both Oiv and Yudoini, they're only Chayiv one because there's only one Lav. And Misa is not Machalik. The Resh Lakish will tell you the Heed the Loig Boy Rabbi Akiva Ma'aser Rabban, which is why Rabbi Akiva includes Megadef and Krisus. A Megadef is going to be Chayiv B'Shoigeg, but Ma'aser Zuta Boy, but Epes Muzarton. So at least by Megadef there is a Ma'aser Zuta. Here it can't even be. Even according to Rabbi Akiva, Yudoini, again, you're not doing anything. The placing the bone on the mouth is a preliminary. When the kishuv is happening, imagine the Baal, the practitioner, the wizard, just has his mouth open and seretzach. That's lav she'ein b'I Maisa. So that's why in Krisus, we're focusing on chatos. You cannot mention Yudoini. Hold on. Explain to me, Rabbi Akiva, what's the Maisa? Because Hakim is supposed to have a Maisa. Let's go. Bal Oiv, Oiv is mentioned in Krisus. What's the Maisa? Hakoshas Riyosef have a Maisa. Because like we mentioned, even though the spirit that's under the person's armpit is speaking, but in order for the sound to go out, the practitioner, he has to constantly bang his arm against his body. Now hold on, the fact that the Rabbanan argue with Chatos, right? But they don't argue with Oiv. No, it's the Gemara over there says in Krisus that Megadef, if the Chachamim would have written the Mishnah, they would have omitted Megadef. But they don't omit Oiv, which means they consider Oiv is mitten in Krisus, a greater action. We got a problem, V'hatanya. This is regarding Avodah Zarah, the prior topic. And on that, that even for only Hishtachava, you're going to be Chayiv, that's only Rabbi Akiva. Guys, see, bowing down is also, let's call this a Maisa Zuta. You're not shechting, you're moving your body a little bit. The Omar, loy be'inan mais. And on that, Rabbi Yochanan says, no, I feel it, because Kafifus Keimasi Rabbanan is considered a Maisa. The Kasha now will be against Reish Lakish. Hashto le Reish Lakish. Kafifus Keimasi Rabbanan loy have a Masa. Hakoshas Reyosef de Bal Oiv. Have a Maisa. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Oiv will only be Chayiv le Rabbanan according to Rabbi Akiva. Ki ka'amar Reish Lakish nami l'Rabbi Akiva. Avol, according to Reish Lakish, this Maisa Zut is not called a Maisa. You won't be chayv. There's a big problem with that, like we mentioned, because the Gemara in Krisus points out that the Mishnah was not written l'Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnah in Krisus mentions Megadev. According to the Chachamim, Megadev should be omitted. But no one says that Oiv should be omitted. Why? Not Rabbi Akiva. Even a Maisa Zuta is not called a Maisa. Oiv should also be omitted. The Gemara in Krisut should have said that. And all the Gemara points out is that according to the Chachamim, from the 36, the one that should not be mentioned, L'Rabbanan, is Megadev. According to the Shlakish, that even a Maisa Zuta, L'Rabbanan, is not going to be Machayev you Achatos, so then we should also omit Baloiv. Huh? To take out. Yatsa, Memayit, yes. Ella Amar Ulon, that in Kirisus, this is important. The Oiv that we are referring to is not the Oiv that we are referring to over here. If someone, L'Rabbanan, would have practiced the normal Oiv of getting the spirit of the dead under your armpit and moving your armpit and getting the spirit to speak, L'Rabbanan, you're violating, but you're not going to be Chayav Achatas. B'shoigeg, like you're not chayiv by Megadev, because it's in the, we view it, or ishtachava for avodah zarah. B'shoigeg, because ain't boy maisa enough. There's another type of oiv. What is the oiv that we are referring to in Krisus? B'mekater l'shed. You are actually burning, normally they burned incense to connect to a demon. Now there's a problem. Worshipping, serving a demon should be included in avodah zarah. Now, mekater is a maisa, burning. Problem is, if that is the case of Masechtas Krisus, mekater l'shed, avodas kechavim hu. Now, who cares? I tell you why I care. Because in Masechtas Krisus, when we're counting the 36, and we're saying we are only omitting one l'Rabbanan, there will be 35. But from the 35 that remains, you have oiv, and you have in Krisus worshiping avodah zarah as another one. If oiv here doesn't mean what it means over here, if it means someone worshiping a demon, it's already mentioned. It's already included there in Krisus. So Elo Amar Rabba, what he means is that b'mekater l'chaver. In other words, there is someone who's burning incense to gather demons. You're not worshiping the demons, but you want to gather them because you want to later communicate with them. Now, the Torah, speaking about the dark arts, not avodah zarah, when it speaks about Bal Oiv, the Yodoini, the Torah mentions the one who's choiver chaver. Choiver chaver was a technique. Again, we're not learning with the Rambam, we're learning that there was a power that they had that God tells us not to tap into, that we would do certain things that would gather different creatures together. Here, you can try to gather demons. Sometimes they would try to gather animals, big animals, little animals. Sometimes they did it, as we'll see in a moment, not to find out the future, like over here, which is another issue. Don't try to inquire about the future, but sometimes there would be animals that would be mazik in the city. The piper, I think there's Agoy Shamaisa. So someone came, that's awesome. That's a chayver chaver. And they did something, they played an instrument, they said certain things, and all of the chayalach would gather around them to get rid of them. So the problem is that if he says that that's what we're talking about. But the problem is if that's the type of oiv practice that's mentioned in the Masechtas Krisus, which even L'Rabbanan, they did it with a maisa. Whatever they did, that's a greater maisa. But again, that should be hamakater l'chaver is included in chayver chaver. Now there we don't mention chayver chaver, so it's not a problem of repetition. But the problem is that chayver chaver should not be chayiv skila. But the Gemara says, no, what it is. Chayver chaver, this is not avodah zarah, is one of like bal oiv or bal yodoini. It's only sorcery, but you chayiv skila. Chayver chaver, the Torah tells you, chayver ze b'skila. So it fits. Coming back over here, this is the big machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, whether misas machalik, which is a big topic, and also how do you interpret the lav she'ein boi maisa. According to Reish Lakish, it's amazing. Where do you chayiv when there's a real maisa? According to Rabbi Yochanan, even a little Maisa, even L'Rabbanan, is considered a Maisa. So Tan Rabbanan, Chover Chaver, Echad, Chever Gadol, this Isur of gathering creatures is whether you're, let's say you would sing incantations. I don't know what they did. To gather large, non-domesticated chayes. Ve'echad chever katan, ve'echad nechoshim ve'akrabim. Like Rashi writes, 3 lines from the bottom, the point of the chiddush is that even though you're not doing it to gather spirits and to find out the future, you're doing it for practical reasons. You're doing it, they should not be mazik you. That is included in the Isur of Chayver Chaver. This technique is something that we may not use. Amar Abaye, Hilkach, Hayman, the Tzomit Zibur of Akrabam. The person is gathering, joining together of bees and scorpions. Afagav the Kamachavan the Loy Lisko, even though he's only doing it because they might hurt him. Now, by the way, if they're going to hurt him to death, like some scorpions, then this is not one of the 3. This is not avodah zarah. That's important. If this would have been avodah zarah, then even if your life is in danger, yaharig va'al yavar. Just to make it, means I'm going to get hurt. If I'm going to get hurt, Reuven is going to die. Reuven can practice this. Even though this is an isur skila, because there is avodah zarah, there is that which is similar to, close to, neighboring, but not avodah zarah, which is the treis daf, the oiv and the sorcery, kishuf. But if it's only for you not to get hurt, in das asur. Okay, now weiter. The Rabbi Yochanan, Maishna, the chefifas koimos Rabbanan have a maisa. The Rabbanan chevra hold. According to Rabbi Yochanan, we said when it comes to avodah zarah, when we speak about if you did it b'shoigig, yechayev chatos, including ishtachava, the Rabbanan hold that megadeif is not. The answer is because you're bowing down, you're moving. Okay, when you're megadev, you're moving. It's achilik, your spine, your lips. I get it. You're doing no movement. That I get. Garnish, mamish. The preliminary. Once the bone is in the mouth, you did nothing. Second to last line. But why is it that Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbanan, even the moving of the lips or the curling of the lips, the bending of the lips, why do I have a masa? That's a big question. Like, what's the difference? So listen, Chavre, what's the actual sin? That is what we're going to focus. And when we're speaking about bowing down to an avodah zarah, or if a person is being megadef with his lips, what we're focusing on is that what words did the Torah use when the Torah prohibited it? So Amar Rava, when it comes to megadef, the primary sin of the one who's blaspheming God, God forbid, is believe. When the Torah speaks about bowing down, the Torah uses the words bowing down. Now, believe doesn't mean, guys, we just learned a few daf ago, and I know Rashi and other Rishonim, that if a person is serving avodah zarah, which includes ishtachava, ma'avo, meira, means if there is no, the Gemara said many times, if a person saw a statue, and in their heart, there wasn't an avodah zarah, they will also not be chayiv. We're not going back to what we learned before. There is my intent, which will be very relevant when it comes to the isur of avdus to avodah zarah, but the Torah uses the words, don't bow down. The emphasis is on the maisa. So since bowing down is, it's called a maisa zuta, nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan holds that even though the Rabbanan hold that lav she'ein boy maisa, you won't be punished. For this, you'll be punished because it's a maisa. When it comes to megadef, the Tosfos here is quoting the words machshava, that the Torah speaks about. The emphasis is that what's the problem with megadef? That in your kavana, you're a person is being mevarech es Hashem, even though it's done through the words, it's done through the mouth, and even though both needs kavana. What does the Torah ask? By megadef, the emphasis is on the heart, on the intent of cursing. And by hishtachavad, the Torah speaks about the action of bowing down. The heart feeling is ein b'y ma'isa. That's the nuance difference. Daf samachem et beis. Masav Rab Zajac on this nuanced splitting over here. It says in a Braisa, Yotzu Edom Zoymimim She'ein B'hem Ma'aseh. The Rashi quotes the whole Toras Kahanim, the whole Braisa. What is the Toras Kahanim speaking about? If I ask you, what sin is a sin for which you chayiv chatos? The correct answer is any sin for which, if one would do it b'mezid, there would be chayiv chatos. For that, b'shoigig the chayiv chatos. The Toras Kahanim, the Medrash asks, why do we have to say that? Why don't we say something else? That any sin for which you're chayiv either chatos or skila. Now there are sins for which doing it b'mezid you're chayiv skila and not chatos. It's very rare. I'll give you one of the three examples. Edom Zoymim. If two witnesses come and they say that Reuven did a sin for which Reuven is chayiv skila, and Beis Din, after going through and interrogating them and accepting them to be emissary witnesses, paskent rule Reuven, you're chayiv skila. Prior to Beis Din actually executing Reuven, if two other witnesses came and they told Beis Din whether Reuven did that sin or not, we don't know. But the witnesses were not there to see it because the witnesses, Imanu HaYisem, Torah says, what do we do to the Edom? First of all, we believe the second group, which means the first group is called conspiring witnesses. What do we do to them? In this case, they're chayiv skila. It's not that every time you conspire in the Beis Din, you'll be chayiv skila. But whatever they wanted to do, in the case where they were going to be chayiv skila, they're going to be chayiv skila. Now, what happens if Edom Zoymimim would say, we did not know that we can't say false witness? They were a shoygig. If we would have said that any sin for which b'mezid you're chayiv skila, b'shoygig you're chayiv chatos, then Edom Zoymimim should have been people that if they sin b'shoygig, they should be chayiv chatos in this case. Edom Zoymimim are never chayiv kodes. Whatever they wanted to do to the other, not kodes. You don't do that. God does that. Very good. Very good. So the Braisa is asking, how do you know? Why don't we say that a sin for which there's skila, even if there's no kodes, for that also, if you did it b'shoygig, you should be chayiv chatos. Not because they want.
You really say it?
We don't say that. We don't say that. But why don't we say it? So the Braisa, I'll tell you why we don't say it. By Edom Zoymimim, because how can you say the chayiv chatos? What did they do? They said testimony in court. That's called a lav she'ein by mice. Oh, guys, people confuse one with the other. It was a couple of days ago, we were focusing on lav she'ein by mice, you're not chayiv malchus. Today we're focusing lav she'ein by mice, you're not chayiv chatos. Now, 1 second. What did we just say right now? We just said right now that any sin, that if the Torah's emphasis is not on the belev intent, but on what you did, then the moving of the lips is considered a ma'aseh. If the Torah emphasizes the belief, you know what? When the Torah speaks about false witnesses, b'chlal and Beis Din, I want to tell you a rule. It's irrelevant to dayanim what's in your heart. That's the first klal. God knows what's in your heart. Dayanim don't know what's in your heart. The dayan can only react towards that which his eyes see. In a Beis Din, what we look at is what you're doing or what you're saying. So you don't have an emphasis on the heart. So even L'Rabbanan, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that's not a teretz. That's not a teretz. That's the reason why we don't say if there's b'mezid kodesh, just kodesh, not kodesh. If there's mezid skila, just skila. B'shoygig chatos, you can't say that be'edom zoymim because lav she'ein by ma'aseh. Why? Ba'amai ha'leisnu b'leiv gavaldik. Leisnu b'leiv. It's not, the emphasis is not on that which you have in your heart. What did the Edom do wrong? They spoke. Guys, we're going to get to really splitting hairs. So, Amar Rava, Shani Edom Zoymimim, Hoyel v'yeshlei b'koyel. The primary aspect of Edom Zoymimim's sin, it's not the movement of their lips, is the sound that they made, the voice that they said. Here's that nuance. The way, the testimony, which is what they're getting punished for the false testimony is done with sound. The fact that the body has to make movements to create that sound, that's also like a preliminary. That's a new answer. No, it's megadev. No, it's bowing down. The sin is the moving of the spinal cord. That is the sin. Of course, you have to have in mind the Shem Avodah Zarah. But the sin is the movement. The sin of, it's Gavaldik. What's the sin of false witnesses? That they're saying false testimony, not that they move their lips. No, that's why the Chachamim hold exactly. No, but why do the Chachamim hold Megadef is not Chayv Chatos? You're Megadef, and by the way, B'mezit you're Chayv Skila, because it's Lav She'ein Boi Maisa. That's the Gemara's question. Are you moving your lips? That's his new answer. It's not what the Torah is emphasizing on, is that the movement of the lips is not really the sin. It's the sound that you're making. Sound, koil, is a non-tangible.
And this is in court, right?
Yeah, in this case.
It has to be in court. It's not like the Adam have to come to court and they have to make that sound in court.
Very good, very good. So Shmuel is pointing out again, the moving to court is avada, a sin, but that's not the sin for what they're getting punished. That's called a preliminary. It's like the Yedoini has to take the bone and put it in his mouth. That's called an action. But that is only in order for, the sin is the sound that he made, the coil that he said. How did he make those noises? Wow. Rabbi Yochanan doesn't subscribe to this type of splitting of the hair. We're going through the whole Shas now. From now, we're going to go to another reading. We just mentioned that Amadalaf. Yeah, that's the source. Not L'Rabbanan. Lav she'ein b'rei ma'aseh ein loikin. I know I'm going top ein loikin because Malkos Arboim Yakenu is juxtaposed right after in the Chumash Kiseitze. It says Lisachtem Shor B'dishin. Now the question is, what happens if my animal is threshing? I don't want my animal to eat while it's threshing. The Torah told me don't muzzle. I'm not muzzling with a physical muzzle, but every time my animal is bombing down, I'm making a sound. And every time I scream, my animal jumps back, and that's the way I'm muzzling it. So the question is, are you chayv malkis for that? That's one question. The other question was, vihiniga b'koil, a similar lap. The Torah says, when you're plowing your field, don't put two different animal types together. And if I put them together and I'm plowing with them, normally I'm going to be moving them. Biyadayim, I'm kicking them, I'm pushing them. That's violating plowing a field, right? B'shor v'chamor yachtov. What happens if I'm moving the animals only with my sound? In other words, I'm violating a lav because Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayiv. I got a problem. And Ashlokish Amar Prater. And noch Rabbi Yochanan says Chayiv because Hakimas Piv Hava Maisa, because you're moving your lips. Ashlokish says Prater Hakimas Piv Lei Hava Maisa. Now this is very Lishitas Amanomadal. Problem is, according to Rava's nuanced explanation over here, it does not fit. In other words, you see that moving one's lips constitutes this Maisa Zuta, this action, even though what's the sin? The sin is not moving your lips. Why did the animal stop? The animal stopped eating because he heard your sound, he heard your voice. But since the voice came through your movement, that is part of the sin. And you know what? Rava takes it back. Rava's moida, that sound, since it comes through the movement of your lips, the movement of the lips is called a meiser. According to Rabbi Yochanan, Elomah. So let's go back. The whole Toras Kohanim doesn't fit. Toras Kohanim is asking, why don't we say that a sin for which you're chayv b'mezit skila, not chatos. Skila, you should be chayv chatos. So the Brisa says it can't be. Because lav she'ein boi meiser, you have the meiser of Akimas Fasav, Ela Amarava, Shane Edem Zoimimim, Hoyel v'yeshnam b're'iyam. Yeshnam b're'iyam means that the witnesses, what are they saying? They're saying that which they saw. In our case, they're lying. But since they're speaking about seeing is the intangible here. And that's why Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbanan, Hishtachava is a sin, sheyesh by maisa. Yedoini is a sin, sheyesh by maisa, because it's a maisa zuta. Imagine. Chasama bekoil is called a maisa because you're moving your lips to scare the animal not to eat. But witnesses, the emphasis, the sin is about seeing or not seeing. And that's the intangible, which is why you're for sure not going to be chayiv achatos.
Let's put the chavos aside. Can the items only say that they didn't know that you know the
It'd be hard to find a situation like that.
First of all, Edom Zoymim are witness. They can't say it because normally the Poyel Basin would tell them before they say testimony. I think they're forewarned right before. You should know. Yeah. You should know that if you're lying, not are they're forewarned, mamish. They're scared. Edom. Part of the interrogation.
To be very, very rare.
Correct. Just the concept. The concept, if they would be able to claim. Okay. All right.
Is there another possibility that the pasuk of Edom Zoman is that the law, the problem is Tasher Zomam, which has less to do with what they're doing in Basin and more about what they're thinking and they're planning?
Well, doing to them again, all of this she'ein by Maisa is only when we're speaking about the shoygig. The Torah is speaking about the Maisa. Normally, don't do it, and if you'll do it, it will happen to you. I want to make it very clear. Just one thing: a bal oiv yodoin is chayv skila. Let's go to Yedoini, Lirash Lakish, Lirabanan. The Torah says that. In other words, he did nothing. Doesn't matter. The Torah says that if a person takes that bone and puts it in the mouth, and the bone talks, however that worked, whoever practiced that is chayv skila. When it comes to chiyuvim of mezid, we don't say yesh b'maisa. The Torah says don't do it. If God forbid someone did it, the chayv the punishment. We're speaking only about what would happen now if they did it b'shagig. Okay, Tana Rabbanan. More details about these dark arts practices. Bal Oiv, the practitioner of Oiv, Zahamadaber Bein HaPrakim. He brings the spirit of the dead. Here the Braisa says, not necessarily, it wasn't exclusively under his armpit. They were able to bring it on any joint of their bodies, on their knuckles. Then they would move their knuckles in between the elbow, on the knees. And or, that's the or, says the Braisa, umi bein atzila yodav. Atzila yodav means armpits. And for some reason, Mustama, that was the most common way because that's normally what's spoken about. What's this practice of Yodoini? Sehamaniach etzem. Guys, the word Yodua doesn't mean the known bone. So Rashi always says there is an animal, there's a creature. The name of the creature is Yodua. And one of the bones of that animal was placed bifiv. And v'humedaber me'elav, and that's the key. Medaber me'elav, like we keep on speaking, is that when the bone is already in the mouth, the practitioner, the wizard, the machashev is not moving his lips. According to the Rambam, all this is just a slight, but we're not going. We're following that. It was a certain koyach that they had. Thinking about a meisvei says v'ha'oyah me'eretz koylechom. Your voice shall be like an oiv. Chevra, that's coming from the ground. What are you telling me? You're telling me that oiv is that they brought the spirit on their joints, on their knuckles, on their armpit. No, the sounds of the dead that were heard when the oiv woke up that spirit, me'eretz. My love, the mishtoye ke'urcha. No, the spirit is speaking ki'urcha. What's the normal way for a spirit to speak from the ground? So anywhere says loy. No. The meaning, the pasuk is the solik v'yosef in aprakim mishtoy. That they brought up the spirit from the ground and it rests on this wizard's knuckle, joint, knee, armpit, and it speaks out from there. Tashama, the tragic story, what happened with Shaul, right? That he went to that woman again. That she was. This is all connected. She brought up the spirit of Shmuel. Shaul. I saw a godly spirit. She's speaking about Shmuel coming up from the Aretz, and my love that she heard Shmuel speaking min haaretz, the mishtoi ki archei. Nachamal, no. She brought up Shmuel's spirit min haaretz, but then it settled in on some part of her body. Why? The Yosef bein haprakim, and then umishtoi. More details about the oiv. Tana Rabbanan. Bal oiv. Echad hamala bizichure. There was a way that they would dafka raise the spirit for it to rest on one's male organ. That's one way. The echad hanishal bigul goylus. Well, goylus was another thing. No, it's up until now the oiv needed to be, so to say, to connect the spirit with him or with her. Now we're speaking about someone that would take a skull and they would get a spirit to speak from the skull. And that's also oiv. Oiv is all mediums through which they connected to spirits and they inquired about the future. Is there a difference whether you bring the spirit onto your body or whether you have it speak out right through you? The skull becomes like a being and you're consulting the skull. So the Gemara says, yeah. Now, I don't know if this is only b'zechurai or if this is on any body part. When the spirit comes up, it ascends feet first. Who's watching that? I don't know. When the spirit comes up, if it's going on the body, if you were to see that ruach, you would not see the way we stand. It will be an upside down spirit. And then like that, feet up first, and it settles on the person's body. That's one din. Another din, ve'ena oila b'Shabbos. Even people who had that power were unable to practice oiv, bringing it on their body on Shabbos. Nothing came to their body. However, nishal b'golgoiles. Number one, when the spirit goes from the earth into the skull, oila kedarkoi, it goes up head first, and you are even able to do it on Shabbos.
So not for us? The details of how.
So I want to say like this, Benegeh Shabbos, I'm going me'inyan, and if my bridge is wrong, I stand corrected. That many people, including by us, we don't go to the oil of tzaddikim on Shabbos. I'm not saying that, I'm saying like we don't go to the oil of the Rebbe on Shabbos Kodesh. Because aside of the fact that the Yechida is connected to the body, to the physical body, but as we also, the Alter Rebbe speaks about it, in Geras Chav Zayin, so you have the Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama by everyone. The Neshama goes to Gan Eden. The Ruach has the power to go up, to be in both places, to go here, to go there. And the Nefesh stays with the Guf, but the Nefesh that stays with the body remains is not on Shabbos. That's one of the reasons, Al Pi Kabbalah, that we don't go to a cave, even we don't go to a Kavadim on Shabbos because the Nefesh is not there. Maybe it's connected to this. In other words, they were unable to bring up, now the fact that they were able to bring the spirit onto a skull, I don't know, doesn't fit. But interesting, at Shabbos, there was less power. You cannot bring that spirit on your body. We had Chaverim here from Sola. A couple of years ago, we went Gimel Tammuz there. I think it was 2 Abaseras. They were there, and there were thousands of people there. And no one went into the oil itself. They went into the oil of Machayit. He said, why should they go Motzei Shabbos? Because by Sfardim, they go to oil of a tzaddik on Shabbos. Now, I want to make it clear. It's not that we don't do it in Eretz Yisrael. We go to the Maras Machpelah on Shabbos. It's not that we don't. It's also a shul. But just to know that our minig is that on Shabbos Kodesh, if there's an oil of a tzaddik, then we stay al yad the oil, but we don't enter the oil proper. Anyways, coming back over here now, oil lahechasalik. Again, the kasha is when you're speaking about bringing it on a skull. These are little technicals. The skull is laying on the ground. So what do you mean it goes up? If you're bringing the spirit of the skull is also on the ground. Hakamei manach, not going up. And the Gemara, ela ema, oine kedarkoi. When you use the skull, oine kedarkoi means the spirit can respond from the ground through the skull. It doesn't have to come on the body. And like we mentioned, oine b'Shabbos. And if you're bringing up the oiv on the body, then the spirit must first rest on this wizard. Now, Zakti Gemara, regarding this thing that when a person who practices oiv is unable to do it on Shabbos, the af she'elazu shal turnus rufus es Rabbi Akiva. That Omar loy turnus rufus, this Roman, he thought he was intelligent, debated with Rabbi Akiva in public, and he asked him regarding Shabbos, how was today different than other days? What did Rabbi Akiva think he was asking? What he meant is, you say like any other day. So he answered him, how are you different than anyone else? Do grace. You're just saying all people are this. He was the big Roman representative of the Caesar. So I'm like, no, you're right. I'm just like any other human being, but the Marek Tzadi, my master he wanted me to be his representative. So Rabbi Akiva says, Shabbos is the same thing. It's like any other day. Shabbos, Nami the Marek, God chose that Shabbos should be his representative, Shabbos Kodesh. So Amalei Tunas Rufa says, no, this is what I meant. This is what I'm trying to ask you. Who told you today is Shabbos? Now, this is a great question. The fact that in Torah Gufa, you have the Mishnah, right? The whole question, if a person is traveling in the desert and they get lost and they don't know what day of the week it is, now there's different types of not knowing. There's not knowing today's Monday or Tuesday. Then there's a person who Taka doesn't know, and the Machlik is Tanoi, whether he makes Shabbos the first, that night to Shabbos, because for Adam, the first full 24 hours was Shabbos, or whether for the Eibishter, the first full day was Sunday. You can get confused. Now, how do you know that we have it right? Mankind came from only Adam and Chava. And after the flood, it also came only from the few families, from the 8 people. Noach ve'ishtoi, and his 3 kids and their wives. If at any time they thought Sunday is Shabbos, so then we could be perpetuating, Danny's not here. We could be giving continuity to a mistake. Maybe we got it wrong. How do you know today is Shabbos? Rabbi Akiva answered him, Nahar Sambatyo in Yochiach. That's your Sambatyo in the Gemara. That there is a river. There's a raging river that you cannot go over the river. You get a ship, a boat, it's going to be the souls, it's churning, it's the white water rapids is nothing compared to the Sambatyon. But at Shkia, at sunset, at 4:23, it calms down. Matzah Shabbos, now you have to know whether the Nahar follows the Rabbeinu Tam. I'm curious, like when is Matzah? Mamish, on Shabbos, it's quiet. And that is our Shabbos. Proof number 2, Bal Oiv Yerchiach. You, Turnus Rufus, you dip into the dark arts. He practiced Oiv. You know that on Shabbos, you can't bring up the spirit of the dead. And Kivrei Shel Aviv Yerchiach She'ein Malo Ashan B'Shabbos. This Turnus Rufus' father was Azar Rasha Merusha. But yet something a little bit similar in the Gemara and Chagig, remember with Acher, that sadly, the fact that he was Mamash and Gehenim, it manifested that smoke was coming out of his grave. Now we know that Gehenim rests on Shabbos. So your father's grave that is smoking, that's what Rabbi Akiva tells him, on Shabbos, what we call Shabbos, there's no smoke. These are the 3 proofs. So Amar Loitunus Rufus tells him, Bizisoy, you disgraced me. So Hashem, Biyashtoi, you ashamed me. Kilaltoi doesn't mean cursed. That actually means you insulted me. You didn't need to bring my father in. You had a good enough answer with Sambatya and with Baloy. Reflecting about another kasha, Shoyel Oiv, Hainu Doire Shalom Eisim. The Torah writes, right? The Torah writes, Oiv Yudoini, Doire Shalom Eisim. What are we saying over here? We're making it clear that Oiv and Yudoini are different ways of connecting to the spirit of the Mesim. That's Doire Shalom Eisim. So it says the Gemara, no. Doire Shalom Eisim refers to another specific practice. Kidatanya. Doire Shalom Eisim, that's quoting a pasuk in Shoftim, Zahamad of Atzma, a person who's starving oneself. And here's that's the kuf. And he's going to sleep in a cemetery. Why? In other words, he's fasting to find favor in the eyes of a spirit. And he's going to where spirits are more comfortable manifesting. And if he'll be noisechein by fasting, then there's a bigger chance that he'll connect to that demon. Says the Gemara, that what if a person's fasting, starving, but in order it can work. The first white line, which is the fasting connected to tshuva, or what we would call in Hasidus iskafia, Allah has kama v'kama, that there is such a path that we are able to connect to a ruach tara. And not only that, on the level of Rabbi Akiva, really he should have been able to connect to such a ruach of godliness that Rabbi Akiva should have been like the greatest of Nevi'im. He cried because he knew that there was certain sinful behaviors, in that case of the generation, that did not allow people to reach even a higher level. This is of the Doir, Rabbi Akiva. God Mulanu. As it says, and indeed, the concept that because of certain sinful behavior, it has a consequence that we are unable to connect to godliness as much as we really should have been able, isn't only benegeya connecting to a ruach of nevi'u, of a navi, because Rabbi Akiva had Ruach HaKodesh, a higher level for something else. Tzadikim would have the koyach to create worlds. Tzadikim doimim l'boiram. Shneimar, as it says, in other words, if not for the sins of the generation, the koyach that a tzaddik has, because Eved Melech, a tzaddik can create a world. And indeed, Rava, or the Yavit says, Rabba, Bara Gavra. This is so important because you should know that when it comes to the Goyim, there's a whole discussion whether the Goyim was really made by the Maral, whether it's a story. Whatever that was over there, the Gemara says Rava or Rabba created the Gavra. How did they create a man? Rashi writes through using the Sefer Yetzirah. Now, whoever learns the Sefer Yetzirah today, Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan of blessed memory, translated it. You understand that you have to be able to concentrate straight, even if you have a group of people for Mastama more than 24 hours, or more people for a lesser amount of time. But he used the Sefer Yetzirah and he created a Goyim, created a man. And Shadr al-Kamid al-Abzeda. Rabbi and Abzeda, that's why they Ivets. Right, Rabbi Shachted al-Abzeda Megillah. Here he sent him this man, have a komishtoi badei. So Abzeda began to, was macht Rabbi Yid in Yiddish. And he didn't answer. Amalei, the moment this Goyim couldn't speak, so Rabbi Zera understood, min chevrayat, you were made from one of my colleagues. You are a creature from the Sefer Yetzirah, hafar la'afrech, go back to dust. And Mikan, don't forget that the Chidah and others speak about that he would not be counted for a minyan, because if he would have a din, he was created by a Jew, not through a Yichud Zun, but through Sefer Yetzirah. If he would have a din of Yisrael, then he would not tell him Hadal Afrech. All right. Now, not only did you have this phenomena, that even because of the avoinos of the generations, but Tzaddikim had that power in the times of the Amoraim, Rav Chanina and Rabbi Oishia, Hava Yosvikum Ala Shabsa, every year of Shabbos they would sit together and Va'aski B'Sefer Yetzirah. And what did they do that for? Mibru, they created Igla Tilsa, the most delicate Igla, like one that was born third to its mother, or it was a third mature, and that is what they ate on Shabbos. So that's a good parnasa. He sits on the whole week. Erev Shabbos, the people of Bechal stayed in shul the whole week. They came home for Shabbos. Erev Shabbos, Sefer Yetzirah, you make your calf, and the mishpacha has parnas. Tana Rabbanan. Let's go right. We have another few minutes. Ma'oinen, don't forget and shayftim, right? Lo yimatze b'cha. Maver b'noyu bita b'eish. And ma'oinen, right? Menachesh, mechashev, ma'oinen. What's ma'oinen? Rab Shimon Omer, zahamaver shiva minei zechur alo ein. They would take the semen from 7 different creatures that they knew what to take it from, and they would put that zera on their eyes, and Rashi writes, and that would give them a certain koyach of Tuma, which they would bring upon themselves a spirit, a demon, and they would know the future, they would have a certain additional power. This is a big line, one who creates illusions, big machlokes and poiskim. Some hold, now the Poyel Mamish, Rav Moshe, I'm saying the poiskim don't accept what I'm saying, but some people hold illusion refers even if you are actually only making a sleight of hand. If that would be the case, then what we call today a magic show would be Asr Mitzad Lav. Many other Rishonim, which is who we follow, hold that the Ha'oiches Es Ha'inayim that the Chachamim are referring to is through real Kishuv. In other words, they made an illusion through a real dark arts. If someone does what we call today a sleight of hand, that's not included in the Lav. We paskin that way, but better for whoever has a magic show, for someone to announce prior that all of this is just a sleight of hand, and even better if the magician will show one trick how he does it before the rest of the show, to show everyone it's not. As time went on, people are not so medagdik on that because no one has these koyches. We're not living in a society like the Rambam writes. There's no koyach, so no one even has a havamina. Okay, let's go right. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva was the big makubal. Mikubalim know exactly what yichud to do at what time, when to daven and when to learn. That's completely mutter. We're speaking about physical behavior to calculate. This is a good time to do it. That's not a good time to do it. The Rebbe was amazing. Anytime you wrote to the Rebbe, you're doing something, he would find a good reason to do it. You're doing it on Tuesday. You're doing it on Wednesday. The Mo'edus Hagdolim were made on Wednesday. You can find in Torah an explanation why every time is a good time. You're doing something good, do it now. If it's not good, never do it. But people will say, I won't do it on Monday, I'll do it on Tuesday. That's according to Rabbi Akiva Lav. And superstition. And he says, tomorrow's a good day to buy. Not today, tomorrow. Or now we're going to superstitions. He says that the wheat, the produce of the Erev Shvius is going to be superior. Now, really, he's putting it on the Torah. The Torah says that on the 6th year, there's going to be an abundance of. But he begins to make statements, categorical statements connected to times. Or that when you uproot legumes, if you uproot them, they'll never rot. Let's hop on another few lines over here. The Torah says, Menachesh means superstition. People enough from me, since the bread fell out of my mouth, it means X, Y, and Z. The stick fell out of my hand. He's saying, and what it means. My son called out, but from behind me, it means that. The raven called me. Tzvi went across. The deer went in front of me. Nachash was on my right. The shul, the fox is on my left. Al taschel be. Don't start. He tells the tax collector, don't collect from me first. That's a bad thing. Collect from someone else first, or I'm not going to pay my bill in the morning, or on a Chodesh or Matzah Shabbos. All of these things are considered superstitions that we may not engage in. What does that mean? That they say that look at the movement of the chulda, look at the weasel, look at the birds, look at the fish, and from their movement, I'm going to interpret how to behave. Now, Chevra, I know it's late. Just know that in Chulin Daf Tzadik Heyam Beis. That's another place where we speak about nichush, superstitions. The Gemara does there mention that Rav Badik b'Mabara, he would want to go on a trip, and he would say to himself, if he gets to the port, if the ship is there, he's going. If the ship is not there, Shmuel Badak b'Sifra, he would open up a sefer. So there are certain times, the Gemara says that nichush is also, siman is mutter, either Torah is mutter, like Mordechai asked the children, Rabbi Yochanan used to ask children, but when it comes even to Rav, if there's logic connected, it's okay. That's the basic approach. If the nichush, like, if the ship is there, I won't waste time, I'm going. If I have to wait another hour, I'm not going. That makes sense. But a nichush that is not logical, like the bread fell. If it fell this side up, it means I'm going. If it fell on that side, it means I'm not going. That is also to be continued.
I'm sure the Hasidim are taking Rabbi Akiva's Kalvachlemer to the next step. He's fasting so high, so not eating, like making a brocha.
Yep.
It's for sure. Like,
yeah.